Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Man Who Truly Delivers show. We had a little complication there, but we're okay. I'm going to build the broadcast. John Rowe has joined us. It is Friday, April 23rd. John, are you still there with me?
I am Stark.
All right, good. John is with us. I'm going to build the broadcast. We had a little bit of complication there, but you should be getting audio, and I'm going to check that right now just to make sure that John, they can hear us. I think that would be important. And they are. They are getting our audio, and everybody can see us. I'm going to add John's picture as we go. John, slowly but surely, as I build the broadcast, why don't you start off and just give a short introduction of who you are and about the book and why you're here. And John has written a book. He is out of Denver, Colorado. He has built many sites. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit, and I'm going to work on the broadcast kids, and we're going to get John and his picture and his book and all that cool stuff up. So, John, take it away.
Sure, Stark. Well, my name's John Rowe, and I've been I was in the site acquisition business for 35 years doing wireless. Started out with microwave towers, and then went into the cell phone industry. I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? I'm listening.
Well, now I can. Okay, I better stop looking at the screen.
Yeah, please don't look at the screen, John. It's 45 seconds behind. Just talk to me. Yeah, just tell me a little bit about you.
Sure. So I got into the telecom business straight out of college in 1974 and went to work with Belden Cable, electronic division, and they trained me in a factory in Richmond, Indiana, and then assigned me to go to New York City and gave me the TV networks and the cable companies as my first sales account. And basically, with that kind of a background, I started and got a leg on a master's degree in telecom later on at Colorado University. And while I was doing that, I decided to come back to Chicago, where the home base was, where I grew up. And I got on a sales job with MCI in the summer of 1979. But after about 6 months, they weren't going to be selling a long-distance service during the daytime for business anymore, and they were moving to just advertising at night because they hadn't really sold residential service, and they were getting ready to lay off half the sales force. And since I had a leg on that master's degree, they gave me an opportunity to work out of DC in network engineering and do site acquisition. I kind of picked site acquisition, I guess, out of several different things because my dad had done real estate and development for gas stations for 15 years while I was growing up. So it was actually the first week of 1980, they gave me my first assignment to get a microwave tower. To do the leasing for a microwave tower near Kent, Ohio, actually in Streetsboro, Ohio. So they sent me out with a location of what they thought would work for them, and I was out there for a week, the first week of 1980, and came back with a signed lease that they accepted, and worked with them on during the week while I was out in the field and on what minor changes the landowner might have wanted, and then brought that lease in after the first week. And so the next week they gave me 3 more sites to do. Now this was a route that started in West Orange, New Jersey, and went up through upstate New York and across on Highway 20, south of the interstate up north, that between Syracuse and Rochester and Buffalo, and then came back down towards Cleveland, Ohio, and terminated at North Royalton, Ohio. So Streetsboro was one of the last sites, and they gave me 3 more microwave sites to acquire the lease for, and 3 weeks later I had 3 more leases. The bottom line was the first 10 weeks I acquired 10 leases that were acceptable for MCI for this microwave route. And that year, I finished all of the entitlements. After 10 weeks, they said, well, start in with the zoning work, getting the building permits. So I started doing that, and by the end of the year, by about late in the year, I had that all complete. And that turned out to be the 4th leg of a figure 8 that in the microwave network that MCI had between New York and Chicago. And so after that, the next year, 1981, they hired some folks that asked me to train them, and we did that, and we started expanding into other areas. I was up in other areas of New England through Connecticut and Massachusetts, and then down into Florida and Georgia, and doing sites. And then in '82 they asked me to go out and start hiring people, and so I did. I went out on the road. I interviewed mostly at that time with the Right-of-Way Association, put in ads and just traveled around the country interviewing people, and picked maybe 1 out of 10 that I interviewed and submit them to the higher ups there at MCI. And I ended up hiring and training like 32 people, and we created 4 offices for across the country for the microwave network before starting in with fiber optics. And at that point, sometime after that point, I just decided to go freelance in 1984, and I've been doing this kind of work all over the country since then. Till 2015, after 35 years in the field, decided it's time to step away from that, and I had some other things I'd wanted to do for a while. I had my original business name was Communications Real Estate. Back in the early 2000, I incorporated Telecom Bird Dogs, and I started getting some ideas, maybe visions about things that might get done, and actually taking off and doing a sequel to the master's thesis that I'd written when I was in graduate school. I did finish graduate school while I was working at MCI in the early 80s. Took courses there at George Washington and D.C. and sent them all back to Colorado and graduated in '83 got my master's degree, and part of that was materials that I had put together to train the other agents that I had hired and managed and recruited. And so that went into a thesis document called Handbook for Land Agents. And so I got that bug again here to update that, and so then in 2016 I started getting traction, and I'm writing this book, Firmly Anchored in Midair, the Handbook of Wireless Site Acquisition and Permitting, after 35 years, and spent about 7 months writing and rewriting, and then brought in an editor and worked with the editor for 4 months. And so it took about a year after getting traction, and I had a book, and I just had to work with someone else. I did self-publish this book to do the layout and the design, try to make it look professional and so forth, and put together the index that summer. And so finally, early in the fall, or just late in the summer of 2017, I was able to publish this book. And sent out copies, some uncorrected copies for review. Got some reviews. Got the head of the industry association, Wireless Industry Association, Jonathan Eilstein, to write the foreword for it. Put a dozen or so other reviews in the front of the book and published it at end of October 2017. So it's been out for over 3 years now, and we have a pretty defined market here, and a lot of people in site acquisition do a pretty good job, and might not need to go back to scratch, to look at this. But I had a lot of really great reviews. I actually kind of value the review more than I do the book. The book is so thick, even though it's easy to read. It's a lot to get your head around, and a person doesn't necessarily read the book thoroughly in less than a month or two, because there's so many different lessons in it that are just practical. They're not just like what my idea is or anything all the time. I mean, they are based on experience, but it's mostly about, this is what we do. I mean, when we research title, I noticed a comment somebody put on LinkedIn today about doing title research and how people saying about how tedious it is. And, in a lot of areas, the systems have been upgraded today, so where it's not as difficult as it used to be, but that's not the case everywhere. And it is mostly the case in the cities, where there's more budget for it and so forth. But a lot of sites still being built. Always macro sites will be built all across the country and in the more rural areas, and everywhere's different. And sometimes you got to go deep into the books. And so this gives a basis for doing that, and for everything that we do. And we might not do these things on every project, but over the course of time, the book covers comprehensively the things that come up, the research needs and the issues and the procedures and processes that come up. And so it addresses those, and it provides a mindset of how to tackle and perceive getting to the bottom of the answer of what might need to be done in any of 7 different stages of the site acquisition process. I broke it down into 7 sections, and if you will, I could start to walk through those.
Well, I did want to say, if anybody'd like to call in while John is talking, we're talking with John Rowe. John has written a book, Firmly Anchored in Midair, and we're just getting started. He's telling us a little bit about how he got there. I only have one question before we do get started, but I did want to let everybody know the phone lines are open. If you have a question, 615-560-9299. If you want, dial in at any point while John is speaking. He may hit a topic you're passionate about or something. We want you to join and dial in. But John, when you write something like this and you go about it and you put as much work into it and you go about it and everything, and after it's all said and done, did you find what you were looking for in writing a book about something that you're as passionate about, and that is site acquisition and permitting and the building and the starting, whether it's small cells or building new towers or what we're getting ready to talk about? Did you find what you were looking for?
Well, yes. I gave myself a structure for the future. For me, this has been it's a transformation. I'm transitioning from doing this work in the field, where organization is very important to get and I was really a highly productive and successful and have good reputation for doing this kind of work. My mantra was always fast track, quality controlled wireless site acquisition and permitting. I believe I lived up to that my entire career. And having information at your fingertips and knowing where to get it quick and being organized with the work that you're doing gives you the opportunity to do more and more work. But every time I would start a new project for a new client, there'd be an element of reorganization, because even though everybody's doing the same thing, you're doing it to a new drummer, to a new system, to a new set of forms and people who administer things different. So that was always a challenge. And then doing this, to put this book in a way so that it could apply to any of the carriers that are out there, because they do all do the same thing, and they all do it in different ways, but to frame this in the context that would apply to any of them. And then, of course, if they have other details, there's more detail in their own system. But to put this in a way so that anyone who read this that was coming into this business, isn't just getting, okay, what do I need to, what do you want from me today? But they can see what's going on with the, down the road. Excuse me?
Okay. Well, a lot to cover. So, I made the mistake, and, we want to get this across. The carriers or some of the bigger three companies break this up. They call site acquisition more or less, and I made that mistake, and I assumed with you, John, when we talked about site acquisition, I was just talking about that one piece, and that is kind of a slang term that was given and kind of put off, because now, like you and I discussed, it's broken into pieces now. But what your book covers is exactly, and I want to make sure I get this right, starts from a ring being issued, or a dot with a Latin long, a certain spot on the earth. And we're going to start right there on trying to start the process from right there when that dot is issued, and take it all the way through until we get the closeout documents from the install, and the carrier is snapped in and everything is done, and the carrier is on air, and you've reported them actually transmitting from the tower.
Right. The book covers 15 essential functions, or they could also be called site development processes, that start with the assignment of the search ring. Now, I picked that up in the book in section 2 because I used section 1 to cover, the basics that someone who's just doing a coordinator's job in this industry would need to know. And, that would be, first of all, somewhat about the industry structure, what's going on in our industry to build it. All has to do with the real estate. It all comes down to having to acquire real estate entitlements. I talk about the current trends and so forth in that business, and co-location agreements, how they work. So this is more of a laying a foundation, and the kinds of things that are going right now with acquisition of fiber systems and FirstNet and Dish and 5G, and then talk about government regulation, how that affects, and then bringing it down to the site acquisition function itself, and what the values that the wireless carriers look for in people who do site acquisition. And after I get that out of the way, and then I talk about the role and contracts for site acquisition and what these essential functions are, and then how systems are designed, talking about coverage versus capacity and micro versus macro, and DAS versus small cell, backhaul and front haul, temporary facilities, and then the components. This is all still part of Section 1. What kind of components go into a site, what kind of towers there are, what kind of sites there are, what kinds of configurations. Talk about switching centers and data centers, and then finally the last chapter in the first section is on the design of the site. What are the three location that the RF design engineers work on, and what are the other parameters that they take into consideration before they issue a search ring. So that's the orientation. So then when we get into the next section, I call it the next level of training. We receive the search area, and I just go into detail about how to evaluate a search ring assignment. You've got a map, you've got a page with numbers on it, and you've got to start calculating these things. You have to understand what you're looking at in the search area assignment. And from there, another module or chapter in that section is the next one is mapping. So you start taking that search area assignment, the map and the information you got, and you start transferring it to where it is on the ground. Is it part of one jurisdiction or two jurisdictions or more? You transfer that latitude and longitude and look at the ground elevation, and you just start developing some maps of the zoning and of the environmental conditions, the streets, what the land use classifications are. Sometimes you have to go into the plat books, but you're basically transferring that assignment onto, where is it here in this country, in this state, in the county, the city, and so forth. And so you're getting a good grip on where that is on the ground. And in order to do that, for many people, they need to understand different types of plat books and how to find legal descriptions and where to go to find information on wetlands and other environmental considerations that might be in that search area. And so we're mapping that out. Then the next module is just determining what the zonability is. We've already become a little bit familiar with what the ordinance is, or what ordinances you're dealing with, and what different land classifications or what parcels are in that search area and how they might be zoned different. And now we're going to look different, going to look at actual distinguish between where's your favorable zoning and where's your less favorable zoning. So we're getting into a lot of research here. We're looking at codes and height limitations and if they have their own tower ordinance and where the airports are and setback requirements from one property to another, or one zoning district to another, and the environmental considerations at a planning department. So you don't bypass about how close that you might be to the target in that search area, because and that's something that comes up front with the assignment. The RF engineer is often, it's always reigning supreme over the site pick, but when we start looking at the reality of the situation, the zonability becomes primary after the RF suitability to the RF engineer. And from the zonability, we look at the constructability. And here we're taking into consideration, what kind of what kind of a tower or what kind of a site you could make this, how big you could make it. I mean, these things are interrelated. There are constructability issues that are limited by zonability issues. We're looking at, really from the beginning, are there existing structures that we can get on? And that's going to save the construction budget if you can co-locate on an existing tower. And then there's a lot of types of existing towers and all the different types of existing structure owners that represent different structures are different birds to deal with, so to speak. I mean, they have, between the carriers and the tower companies, but there could be broadcasters, and utility companies have towers that might be used, and local government, public safety agencies, water towers, and buildings. But they're all, a different shade of gray as to how they're going to deal with you. And so we're looking at, how constructible is this site, whether it's a co-location or if we have to build a new site, new antenna structures. There's issues with accessibility. A lot of those issues are legal issues. Some of them could be environmental issues. More and more now we're dealing with reservations as we densify across the country. A whole lot of information in here on working with Indian reservations and getting the building permits and right-of-way permits, and just understanding from the outset. This is part of due diligence. This section that we just started here that's comes after the orientation is finding out and answering these questions as much as we can up front, so that we don't have to deal with them the same way later on as if we didn't know ahead of time. So from zonability, constructability, and then the third item in the abilities here is the leasability. And even before we start talking to the landowner, we're looking at, is the property available, or are we going to need to make space available? I mean, there's issues like, if you see a for sale sign, what's that mean? The setbacks that come from zonability affect leasability, in that if you don't have room for setbacks, the property's too narrow, then you can't really call it available. I mean, how much space do you need for it? How much these sites are actually feasible? Are there title issues? How many owners are there? Are there multiple owners? I mean, it could affect what your leasability is. Are there existing leases on these properties? Can you find the landowner? Some landowners are, buried in an LLC, and even though you can find the address of that in the county records, it might be some P.O. box in Timbuktu, and it's not really clear always who the property owner is. So sometimes just the amount of time it takes to track down a property owner can affect how you're going to rank a site when you send in your search area report. And businesses we look up, we go through the Secretary of State's website and we might find business information there, and we're going to start looking to what is the property owner disposition, and what might be their preferences, and what are the basic terms that usually when we do talk to a landowner, we're only really asking them about the basic terms. Company wants to build a site in this area. Your property could be the property. They're looking for a 25, 35, or 50-year lease, and it might be 5-year terms that renew each other. And what the proposed rent is a lot of discussion on putting forth a rent out there that is sustainable, that it doesn't matter if people talk about it, because you've got a basis for it, and you also have your limitations for your client, and you don't really want to take every site or any, if you have to the limit of what they're willing to accept off the bat without them giving approval and so forth. But so they're the leasability. And then the final module there, the chapter in that due diligence, is actually contacting the landowner, and I actually have a script for just what I was just talking about, your first conversation with the landowner. When you call up the landowner, you need to be professional and succinct and not dilly-dally around, so you just gotta cut to the chase. Sometimes you might get a voicemail and so forth, and kind of address the issue of, really, would you say anything different to a voicemail than you would to the person that you want to consider your proposal and so forth. And
could you stop right there, John? John, could you stop right there?
Mm-hmm.
You bring up a great question, and I just want to address this now that we got a minute. Take a breath there, just a second. You bring up a great question, and that is, here let's play what if. We get to that point, and you're getting ready to talk to a prospective landowner, and this guy's property can work. I mean, you've looked at it, like you said. You feel like you could get power in there. You feel like you can get fiber in there. You like what you see. You've got a not so long from the street to the site. You feel like it's clear shot with the poles, if you do your own power, so on and so forth. But you get to that point and you get this guy on the phone or young lady, or you get in the conversation. And how do you go about talking them off the cliff, as far as, everybody wants to come out of the gate and, they want to come in at, a high rent figure, and that, I don't mean to be mean, but I can go right across the street and, they're looking, and I'm going to use an example. They could be looking for a figure of 1,500. The figure that really everything that we're all talking about is somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 to 800, possibly could get into a 700 range. You're in a rural site area. And how do you talk that guy off the cliff that, you're in a situation here where if you want the site on your property for the next 50 years, you got a great income coming your way. But if not, John Rowe's going to take that ring and go across the street. And how do you talk that guy off the cliff and to get him to back off how proud he is of his property?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not going to play one landowner off of another. And I'm going to focus on the fact that all the landowners I talk to are being offered the same amount. And before I get to the point of that first conversation, from the work that was done in the, evaluating the RF suitability, zonability, constructability, and leasability, I'm going to, whittle down, typically anywhere from 13 to 15 different properties that I've considered, to the top 3 to 5. Most of the clients, they don't really want more than 3 candidates submitted at one time. And I'm not talking somebody into anything. I am explaining clearly what the opportunity is. But anybody that I have to talk into this is I consider a weak candidate, for one. Now, I've been, a lot of areas I've worked in that weren't in the city, maybe small towns and rural towns and so forth, where, we might have had a limit of, say, $800. If I was near a town, I might pay more, but I'm getting a lot of deals at 500, and a lot even. And I went, sites all over Rapid City for 10 years at 700 a month. A kind of a bustling city of 65,000 or more people. But when you're in comparison to others who are lowballing, trying to get leases there that don't justify, that you can't. A landowner can't really justify, in a town like that paying, or only receiving $400 or $500, and I'm offering $700. And I'm doing that across the board. I'd rather have the name of the guy. I'd rather develop the reputation of the guy who was consistent and who put the best number up front. And it was still $100 less than what the limit was from the carrier. But I think that how you handle yourself when you approach landowners, and when you, for that matter, approach zoning planning departments, informs to your professionalism about how you're getting things done and so forth. And so when I come in and I say that this company is, willing to pay $700 a month for this site, I know that I don't need extra approval for that, and I know that that's a fair amount given on what the market is. Now, I have to admit, I've been up in areas where the oil boom was going on, and the company was willing to pay more, right off the bat, and didn't even have to be in a city. But those kind of circumstances are what they are, and I am an agent. I don't even, other than saying, okay, I've done an evaluation of this market, and this is what I believe is a fair price and what we're offering, and I have the hammer to do that. I am not going to negotiate against myself, and I am not going to commit to the company paying more unnecessarily. And so if I get somebody that says, well, I want $1,500, they're not going in the top three. And, the more that it's clear to me that they think, okay, this is a, special deal, I can get some extra money, and that's not who I am looking for at all. I am looking for the humble landowner. And that is not always the poorest guy around, or but it's the smartest. People know if they want it to. Sometimes it doesn't, it doesn't work for what they got going on their land. But I'm not going to stop. If I need to go through all 15, generally about 15 different. Researching 15 different properties works for me. For a lot of others, they're, satisfied with 5 or 7. But I'm definitely looking for those people that are humble enough to appreciate the offer that they're getting for the amount of space that they have to give up that's so small.
Speaking with John Rowe, he's written a book, Firmly Anchored in Midair, and we're just discussing land orders. If you're just joining us, 615-560-9299. If you'd like to call in, lines are open. I was just looking at the broadcast here to see what was going on. But, John, you are exactly right. And tower leasing is a great deal for a prospective landowner. You're not taking up that much space. It's consistent. Normally, all the ones that I've built in the past, not a one of them has gone away. So those landlords are still making money if the landowner or the tower owner haven't bought the dirt out from underneath of it. But it's good for the landowner. But let's move along. Let's move along into another topic. So you get the ring, you get everything, you get these candidates. You go into RF and take it back to the book, John. Let's move on to section 2 or wherever you were.
Well, we're just finishing off the second section on due diligence, talking to property owners, and I go through and discuss the different kinds of scenarios that might exist, what the different kinds of landowner criteria might be. I talk about rural search areas. I talk about urban search areas, making offers. I talk about multi-story buildings and about even having to canvass if out in an area or with buildings to find out who the right people to talk to might be. I talk about counteroffers. I talk about the non-negotiables that the carriers, the clients set up. There's always 3, 5, 7 items that are non-negotiable. So I go through those. Typically that's assignment, right of first refusal, interference, insurance, and environmental clauses. Could involve mutual indemnification. There's, could be reasons there for subordination agreements, and then I show a little information on, okay, this is how much a landowner is going to get, how that cash accumulates over time. I've included a CPI index for 20 years showing that, for 20 years, we haven't had, and actually now more, like 25 years, we haven't had very high CPI increases. When they start asking for escalations, and, you got information here that shows, well, the cost of living index hasn't really gone up very significant over time, and they start, then you got tools here to combat the thing. Parks have always been a big thing. People always say, well, can I get some phones? And, some of these things are just silly when compared to the rent that is received for a cell lease, even at the lowest levels in the most rural areas. And I just kind of conclude that whole first due diligence section up with developing the short list and doing ongoing due diligence as you can. You can't bring in stuff you don't know to the site selection process, but you can kind of keep tabs on that and know the neighborhood that you're working in, so that things come up, that people will call you because they heard your name, and they maybe have some new information for you and so forth.
Well, you bring up a great topic, though. You mentioned, and we use so many acronyms in our industry, in the telecom industry, but one of the things that you want to talk about something that'll bite you really quick if you cannot get that, and that is that SNDA, that's Subordination Non-Disturbance Agreement. Man, that is huge, and there's the big boy carriers, they're not going to sign unless you got that thing hammered down, and that's just the fact is, if that loan gets out of control on the old farm, then we want the opportunity to buy it first. Type of situation. But man, the carrier had to think of that, and that wasn't an instrument used in the beginning of your tower builds. It kind of came along there in the 2000 and 2002, didn't it? That SNDA was added to the documents.
Well, I can't say that it wasn't there. I probably have evidence of working with those in the 80s. But I wasn't asked to do much with those.
Yeah.
Say maybe before 25 years ago. Usually the lawyers handled that afterwards themselves.
Yeah, but I mean, but it's a good thing. It is such a good thing, and I didn't even know what an SNDA was until I got into the tower industry. But boy, it is a valuable instrument to somebody leasing tower space. And I wouldn't, if I'm on the carrier side and I'm representing the carrier and I've worked for the carrier, I'm not going to do a lease with you unless you got one either.
Right. Well, yeah. So these things about due diligence, things I've talked about so far, there's a lot of references in these early stages in the book to later on. Like there's more information about subordinations and all the different kinds of legal agreements we make, like in Section 5. And so this is a mosaic where we have to see from the beginning the things we're going to have to deal with later on, and that's part of what this has been all about here in this Section 2 on due diligence in your site search. So Section 3 is shorter. It's just about putting these reports together. And so it's about taking the information that you uncovered in the Section 2 and transforming it, first of all, into your search area report, which is what the site selection is made out of. And then, and then having site selection, working with the project team and bringing all them in to, for what, I've discussed like 8 or 10 or 11 different members of 12 of the project team, from the RF engineer, construction manager, the ops people, the A&E firm, the environmental consultant, your project attorney, title insurance reps, and yourself and your contact at the client company, and how all those people come into that, and just maybe 2 or 3 of them, the RF engineer and the construction manager, make the site selection, but then everybody else in there has a vested interest in that site selection, and then to end up that section 3 on what's called site selection analytics is putting together that skip. Different names for skips at an early stage or a late stage, but this is the due diligence package. The skip is the package that contains all of the information that the site acquisition guy, by virtue of his responsibility, has collected about the site that's been chosen, whether it's a tower, existing tower, a rooftop, or vacant land, or and what all the jurisdictional. This is like kind of for me when you ask me about how the book helped me. Well, it gave me an organization to kind of go forward with, in from working in the field to doing what I'm doing now. And the skip is a place where a site acquisition person can not only for everyone else in the project, but for themselves, detail all the information in a concise report. And typically these reports for me, they include photographs, they include excerpts from zoning documents with the jurisdiction, and typically mine run about 45 or 50 pages. The photographs take up a bunch, but in any event, and you're including the stuff that comes right out of the courthouse on that defines what the parcel number is, and the printouts. We call them the printouts that come from the courthouse on properties and so forth. So those first 3 sections, you end up with a site that's been selected. And then there's, issues about how to talk to the landowner, about letting them know that their site was selected, and if all of a sudden once their site's selected they want more money, then then I'm going back to the fact that from the very beginning I was submitting their information based on the fact of a certain price that I gave them up front.
Yeah.
And now if they are violating that price, then that's a big thing. They're ruffling my feathers because I can't accept that.
Yeah, I mean, because they don't understand that you are being hired by a $200 billion machine that doesn't want, they don't want to be jacked around. They hired you to go out and get it done.
Yeah, but they're not getting jacked around. I'm the one that's getting jacked around. I'm not taking it to the client unless there's some absolute necessity to do that. Because what I'll do first is, as I will say, okay, they want more money, I can go back to one of these others. I'm still always putting that decision with the company of whether the company wants to pay more than what these people agreed for in the beginning, and I don't even necessarily tell the landowner that I'm going to talk to the company about this. I'm just going to say, okay, well, that could change things, and I've got 2 other landowners that agreed to the same price, and if that won't work for you, I'll probably have to go to them. Now, often I won't have to go to anyone else, but I have to judge the character of that landowner as to whether or not he's going to be satisfied. He or she's going to be satisfied.
I like what you said, though. You said right there, and this is just such a great point, John. You said it's not up to you. You're not in the driver's seat, John, to make that decision. You said, I'm going to halt. I'm going to let them know We've reached a point now the landlord wants more money. Do you want me to offer more money, or do you want me to go see the other candidates? You make a good point. It's not your decision. You are SIDAC. You are to get the best candidate. But, I mean, your carrier may say, John, stick with the A candidate and try to wrap it up, and you've got so much leadway. You know, they may not want you to go to 2 and 3.
Well, this is the thing is I'm an agent.
Yes.
As side acquisition, we're agents. You know, some like to act like they're, you know, like the powerful people. Like, okay, I can make this deal for you. I don't think that serves us. Part of my whole message in here is about getting things done and getting them done right, and it's about having the right mindset.
Yeah.
And that mindset doesn't work.
We're for the carrier. I mean, and I mean, we are all for the carrier because this is we're not being mean about it, but John, it's a game. Once you build, you don't want to build one tower. You don't want to do this just one time. You want to do another one behind it. And in order to do that, you have to have the carrier's interest all the time. But you know.
Yeah. Did I say that's what we call fiduciary responsibility?
Yes.
And any real estate broker you go to, I mean, a lot of them they say, well, I'm not going to take this back to the homeowner that you know what, because you didn't offer enough or something like that. Well, that's like illegal. That's fraud. Having a fiduciary responsibility to a client is a serious thing. It means that you are considering their best interests at all times. And when I say, well, I mean, in essence, you know, the carriers, you know, they've kind of set some of this system up of bring me back 3 candidates to sort of dumb it all down in a way.
Absolutely.
Because when you develop 3 good candidates and they pick one and then all of a sudden that one wants more money than they agreed to in the beginning, well, the decision is a no-brainer. You're going back to the other candidates.
Yes.
And, you know, and there's no reason I won't tell, because that's what I told them the first time. I said, I'm not even going to say, out of these 3 people, and you may know them all. They may be your cousins or your neighbors, and I've said the same thing to them, that your involvement, me submitting your property as a choice is contingent on you agreeing to these things. They have to make the same agreements, and if you change that later on, then you know, that's what we got the other candidates for.
That's exactly right, and you know, and you're just doing a fact finding. You're not really. They don't understand. Your job is to present some facts. The carrier will make the decision what they want to do and how they spend their money. John Rowe's going to be paid the same amount regardless for the package.
I'm just calling it an engineering decision. I might rank them, and I might rank them. Generally, I rank for what I think is the best property, but I put a strong emphasis in my notes on if I think that, you know, one property owner or another will be less or more of a headache, you know, down the road.
Yes, I mean, you got to do that, John, because, you know, if you get up, I mean, I will tell you, I mean, I built 14 last year, and all my landlords were fantastic to work with. But, you know, one of the guys I worked with, I mean, he was a retired forester. And, you know, when you you know, and we were clearing quite a bit of trees. And, you know, he told me point blank, I mean, he said, Storko, you're going to have to stack those trees over there, and I expect it to be done. I expect it to be done right.
Yeah.
We did, but, you know, knowing that when you got somebody that's specialized in something that, you know, they kind of do that kind of crosses over into what you do, you got to kind of be careful there. You got to kind of be careful there, John. You just do.
Well, yeah, I mean, in all those things, whatever it is, even if that, you know, it's funny, when I first started looking for microwave sites for MCI, well, mostly in the East, 40 years ago already, yeah, I would often look for a little patch of trees because they weren't using the field for something else. I'd like look for how could I, you don't really want to get into what, if you can help it, what's their money making activity on those properties to start out with.
No.
You want to be found money. And the company didn't mind taking down a few trees, and a lot of that is with the construction manager. I mean, I'm always going to carry those notes along. Lawyers might not like to see them in the lease, but they're certainly being passed on to the construction managers, and there you got to have construction managers that are decent people and they're willing to do the right thing instead of because the landowner, the property owner relationship, if it's good, it goes a long, long way. And when those, not just the construction manager, but the field techs have to come out later on, I mean, they certainly appreciate having a good relationship with the property owners. And so most that I've worked with have been willing to, take the extra time to do the right thing.
All right, we'll continue on.
Okay, so there we've really finished one division of the whole process, the site acquisition function, the site selection, and after that we go into site development, and this whole deal becomes a project because all of these other people in that project team are in on it now, and we're going to kick off that project, and we might typically with a site walk, but even before the site walk, then the site acquisition guy typically is the one that's arranging for a consent to get on the property. They're drafting the space, the agreement for the lease, space, and so forth, and getting that to the landowner. They're ordering the title. As you say, a lot of these things can be broken down, but they're the ones that have the first-hand knowledge to order title insurance commitment, and then send to the environmental consultant the information on the site, based on the form of what the environmental consultants want. And so whether or not you all get together for a site walk or, different parties and project team do their own technical visits, it's often important to get out there with the landowner and the A&E who's doing the drawings to, be specific about tying down where that site's going to be. I might say, over there. The landowner and I might agree over there, which, ties it down to maybe a quarter acre.
Right.
But, that doesn't need to get any deeper than that at that point. But once we get out there with the other people on the project team, the client and the architects and engineer are going to start these drawings, then we want to set some stakes in the ground, and we want to do it in a way so that you're not going to need to move. A lot of times we'll say we're going to do it somewhere, and the drawings come back and they want to block the only access to the property with the site, and got to kind of step in sometimes and speak for the property owner and say, you can't. This isn't going to work if we're going to try to block the access to his 100 acres with this site. We've got to just put it off to the side so he can drive past it and so forth. And so we're going to tie that down. We're going to get pretty specific about that, and we're even going to ask the landowner to sign off on the sketch that comes back real quick from the A&E about where that's going to be, and we're not going to want to move too much faster. I mean, things are all kicking into gear when you're ordering title, you're getting your right of entry consent for your surveyors and your environmental consultants and so forth, and so they're going to take a little time to get all that stuff moving along, and in the meantime you're going to have that landowner tie down exactly based on the first sketch that comes out from the A&E where that site's going to be, how the access is going to run, and where the fiber and the power is coming in from, and so forth and so on. So that's the first part of the section 4 on initiating the project. I call it kind of expediter part of being a SIDAC consultant. Is that's where we kind of start in getting these things going, and then from there on, we're gonna be expediting things through, through the people in the project team and the landowner and so forth. After that, I've got a chapter on colo applications, and because we're going to be making for existing towers, we're going to be making our colo application real quick after site selection, and so I've got what do I got there? 8 pages, 9 pages on that.
Wow.
On just the process, just getting it started. Later on, we'll address the colo agreement, but this is just getting the application started and preparing for like the structural analysis and colo applications are detailed like an Excel form. And they've got to be done right, and they need review, and they go straight to a constructional analysis. So if the colo application is wrong, the structural analysis is going to be wrong. That sounds like wasted money. So that's a precise thing to get done. Then I go into the whole title commitment thing. There's another 9 pages on the title insurance industry and walking through the title insurance commitments and Schedule A's, Schedule B's, and supporting documents and getting abstracts and just cover how the title insurance commitment actually will tie in later on with the survey, and how those industries have, kind of set themselves up to dovetail with each other.
Yep.
The final couple chapters in this section about getting things started are about drawings, about site design, and I break it down into 2 chapters, and they're each like, first one is 14 pages, second one is 7. First one on site design is about standard drawings. It's typical that a lot of that all the drawings that have to be done for every site are included in a standard drawing package that the carriers ask from the A&Es. A site sketch, a preliminary survey, a final survey, bringing the title and the survey together, the FAA 1A or 2C letters, a lease exhibit to go into the lease, the package of construction drawings, what gets included in those construction drawings, architectural, electrical, road design if that's necessary, grounding, foundation design if you're putting in a new tower, tower drawings. They're getting these things started. They still come out in a preliminary form, but eventually they're going to be finalized. If there needs to be a structural analysis, or if it can be done with just a structural design letter. And then, actually, typically that all those drawings are going to go into a bid package that's going to go out to contractors to bid on. And the site acquisition guy doesn't, this is not something that he is, not overseeing. I mean, site acquisition guy has to catch the mistakes, because a lot of these drawings are done off a template. And a lot of the draftsmen are using a template from the last site they used, or, the last 20 sites that they used. And so they miss stuff. When you move a template that's based on another site into a template for a new site, there's a lot of room for error there. And that's where a lot of our errors come up, is in not looking at this. So the site acquisition guy's got the most intimate knowledge of that site to understand when something doesn't look good, to bring up a question about it. The last chapter in that section is about supplemental drawings. Often depending on the carrier, the client, they may not order zoning drawings, as part of the standard package.
Right.
They may figure, well, if there needs to be zoning, then that's an add-on. If you need photo sims, that's an add-on. If you've got to specify setbacks, that's an add-on. If you have to do sightline profiles or landscaping plans or parking plans, these are not things that need to be included in the standard package.
Exactly.
Stormwater, what's that?
Exactly. I'm just saying, yeah. I mean, those are add-ons or extraordinary items that you would add in versus, like you said, you turn off this little county road, and you're going to go out about 100 yards, and there's a cornfield, and X marks the spot. We're going to stack it here. But you're talking about, yeah, there's a lot of different items that could increase the site cost, and you as a site acquisition, you got to be aware of that site cost the whole time, because that affects your next site that could be assigned to you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make that distinction for people who are coming into this, so that they can see that far ahead, and they can see that there's an explanation why they don't ask for zoning drawings, or that zoning drawings aren't considered to be part of the standard package and all the things that come with them, and so that this is it's intended for people who are learning. They're looking ahead to how they're going to handle site acquisition. So that's all the preparation for preparing for the project. They're in that section 4. Section 5 is all about space rights.
Okay.
And I break that down into 7 chapters, okay? And so some of these things we talked about, but here we get into the details about the terms that are in these different agreements. And the first one is just initial space rights. It's just, the right of entry consent, the entry and test agreements, what we need on a co-location due diligence that might already be done. If we're working with options or letters of intent, or if there's, other types of option considerations they might be, and temporary agreements.
Right.
So that's just one whole chapter or 7 pages about, and I don't necessarily address each one of these things in more than a paragraph or 2, because it's just to provide a context about each one of these things. And, because different companies are going to have their own different forms. I'm not stacking forms into this handbook. I'm given a heads up to get those forms from the project that you're in, because there's no reason for me to send out some template form that isn't going to mean anything. It's just a waste of paper. So that's the first chapter out of these 7. The next one, I go into a whole 11 pages about leasing concepts. And this is where I explain what a subordination and non-disturbance agreement is, and about the different types. I go into about the different types of ground, leases, whether they be ground lease, tower lease, a rooftop, or even building agreements. I talk about those, and about safety codes, and about water tower leases, and I compare the different leases. Now, I'm not going through the paragraphs in these leases, because I'm going to do that a couple chapters later. I'm going to go through paragraph by paragraph. So I'm given a context for everything here. The third chapter in this section is about those co-location agreements. And it's about taking that application that's been approved and with the structural and so forth, and moving it to get all of the due diligence that needs to be done. The co-locations are great because you don't have to go and do an underlying lease. Most of the tower companies, they give warranties that their title is good, and that they've done environmental work already, and that's all that due diligence that they pass on to the site acquisition agent has to get it from the tower company. Once, the tower company will give so much, they'll approve an elevation on the tower early on. But some of this further environmental detail is going to be something that you get later on while you're waiting for the agreements to get drafted and approved and signed and so forth. Including the structural analysis and whether or not there needs to be structural modifications and whether or not those structural modifications, how they're going to be dealt with. I mean, that's going to change the standard template of the lease agreement or the license agreement between the carrier and the tower company if there have to be modifications, because that's going to take time, who's going to pay for it, how that's, so address those things. Once everything is, ready to rock and roll, the tower company rep is going to need to provide a notice to proceed to the site acquisition agent for his client that you've done all the things that include verifying that only a building permit is required and issues having to do with whether or not you needed a consent from the underlying landowner and then providing information about who the contractors are going to be and what's the schedule for being on the site and those kinds of details and you're going to be kind of wrapping it up, but even after there's going to be construction walk there, could be before and after between the carrier construction manager and the tower construction manager, making sure everybody's on the same page, and then there's going to be post-construction details, as-builts and so forth,
right,
that are going to be developed. So I'm taking the co-location agreement through the conclusion there in that chapter, and then following that chapter, the fourth chapter under space rights. I call it space rights because we're getting space, whether it's a lease or we're buying the property or whatever we're doing, it's a space. Technically a space issue.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, I just said absolutely. I'm agreeing with you. Whether you're acquiring it on a rooftop or you're acquiring a new build or you're just acquiring colo, but you're representing another carrier getting on somebody else's tower. You are right. Seeking to get some type of space and a lease wrapped up in it.
Yeah. So then the next chapter is what I mentioned about lease provisions, where I, break down the leases, almost like, paragraph by paragraph, talk about the lease area and, considerations, the right-of-way easements that are necessary. Then there's, different clauses that come in, like the right to fence, the right to alter the land, the right to continue to do due diligence. The property description. I mean, here you bring the lease together with the title, with the survey. You've got the commencement language. There's lots of nuances to these things, commencement. Consideration, of course, is the payment, and then the rent, and what the lease terms are, and when that might even, the commencement is a lot of issues about, when will that start and so forth, and on whose signal will the rent start being paid, whether or not there's going to be increases and how those increases are determined. Other clauses, the right to protect interest, the carriers, of course, as you alluded to before, with subordination. And part of the title report is about if there's liens against the property, the carriers are not likely to want to start a lease before the liens are taken care of. But if liens develop later on and they start to affect they could have an effect on the carrier interest, then the carriers might want to be able to step in. Or they'll want to step in on their own and do something about it, and whatever it costs them, take that out of the rent. in case of default from one side or the other, what the cancellation and termination rights are, assignment. Assignment is also an area where they talk about subleases, if they, how it'll be dealt with, and so there's often some discussion about the possibility of subleasing and assignment. There are other legal terms like quiet enjoyment, or how the tax gets assessed, and carriers are usually willing to pay the increase on, of the improvement on the property based just on their site going in there, but they aren't necessarily interested in having that bill sent to them directly. They just assume the property owner take the initiative to show them the difference between one year and the next after the site goes in, if that's a factor. How personal property is addressed. Towers are actually considered personal property because they can be taken down from the base, and the radio equipment in the towers are personal property, and that might be taxed differently, and it also might be the impact of financing. That the radios are financed, so that the personal property remains the carrier property. And restoration, if there's an earthquake or something like that.
Act of God.
Tornado,
act of God, yeah. Act of hurricane, act of God.
Yeah, carriers want to make their own decision. Other, things you've heard of, indemnification, hold harmless. The insurance, they're going to want the property owner to carry their own insurance. Because if they don't, the deep pocket theory is if something happens on the property and the landowner doesn't have insurance, well, they're going to go straight to the people that have an interest in the property that do have insurance. And so, sometimes the carriers the carriers will, like on a farm property, you get farm insurance, but on a commercial property, you get commercial insurance. And so, you have to have approvals, special approvals. Waiver of subrogation has to do with, in situations of insurance, being able to go through the property owner and address issues in court that, without having to have somebody else in the way of your representation. The warranties, the landowner is going to warrant that they have the good title, and they're going to warranty to each other that they're going to be good, have a good relationship. That the agreement, it might be binding on the successors and the heirs. If you property transfers generation, and here it makes it clear that whoever inherits the property inherits it under the same terms and conditions. As in a rights of sale. But then again, we have the ROFR, the right of first refusal, which is it's a complicated clause to write, and but it's the one thing that that gets into the memorandum of the lease that gets recorded with the county that points out to any potential buyer of that property that the carrier has an interest there, and they have the right to refuse based on how that clause is written, or first refuse, which means they have the right to take the same deal as the buyer might have made with the seller.
Mm-hmm.
Problem here is that a lot of buyers, even though it's in the title report, they don't pick it up until closing. And then they get upset. But if people are looking at this stuff ahead of time, they're knowing that if you're going to sell your property and you're not selling it to, to one of the companies in our industry that buys easements underneath leases,
yeah,
then the carrier is likely to waive that right of first refusal. They're just trying to put this in to stop third-party easement companies from coming in, getting a bunch of these, and then trying to hold them hostage.
Right. In a suitcase sale, that look, I bought all this dirt underneath all these towers, which wasn't a business, what even considered a business. But John, all of a sudden, right around 2008, 2007, was born into a business, and that is buying the dirt out from underneath existing structures that are already in the air.
Right. Yeah. So that's a topic that people could go on and have conversation about for some time.
Yep.
Anyway, I just wrap up these lease provisions with a couple pages about how every company that's out there doing this has what they call substitute or drop-in provisions. That if the landowner doesn't accept it the way it is, they've got a fallback that might be used, and it may or may not be approved to be used at any time or with consultation from the project attorney. But that's something that site acquisition people should know about. What are those fallback clauses that they might be able to use without having to go to an attorney? Mostly, the big thing here is that's a problem is legal fees. Site acquisition people not being able to negotiate and having to push this to lawyers, and then these project costs go up because of legal fees, and so that that whole scenario is addressed. Then there's three more chapters here still in this part on space agreements, and one is we haven't talked about purchase contracts. So Chapter 25 is on purchase contracts. It's about, doing a lease versus a purchase analysis. It's about how states are organized with their own forms for, in many cases, for land agreements, and then the things that are subject to purchase contract deadlines. These are the things, the kind of clauses that are in residential agreements, because there's a lot of things that need to get done in a 30 or 60-day period, and you're not going on with your relationship with the purchase contract. Like all the leases are ongoing relationships, but the purchase contract, that's you're going to close, and then it's going to be a done deal. And so there's deadlines for title insurance, getting that submitted, and surveys, and there's time frames that can be considered for objections to the title insurance commitment or the survey, property disclosures, physical inspections, and that could be objected to. And then the difference between liquidated damages and specific performance is, whether or not if one party or the other decides to back out, then who's going to pay for that? Who's legally liable when they had a contract and that everybody complied with all the terms of those agreements? And can the seller force the buyer to perform, as long as the seller did all of the things and overcame all the objections and the deadlines, or whether they're just going to liquidate the deposit and what other expenses might have been made? You determine one or the other of those. You don't do both of them. And then assignment, if the agreement could be signed, and then all the closing details, which, like with a home, has to do with prorations of taxes and insurance and utility bills and stuff like that. So I cover that, and finally, before I get into the finalizing the space agreements, I've got a 16-page chapter here on the miscellaneous agreements that it might have to be done to supplement your basic lease or purchase agreement. And of course, I got to cover temporary agreements first because that's a miscellaneous. I mean, they're just a whole thing of their own. But then we go into easements, and I talk about the different types of easements, and easements these are easements that may be necessary because the lease agreement doesn't cover everything.
Exactly.
I go into these oddball things like guy anchor and proximity easements, or for right-of-way people. You know, if you're bringing in right-of-way, longitudinal and crossing easements, like apply to highways and railroad tracks. I'm talking about small cells in the public right-of-way, and here I go, and I also talk about the easements, the people that we talked to a little while ago, about the easements that underlie ground leases, and I give a site acquisition guy conversation to talk to landowners about, you know, when they might not be interested in letting out an easement underneath a ground lease. Licenses, I compare licenses and leases, and then I talk about permits, government permits. You know, we get zoning permits and building permits, you know, under a land use context. But local, state, and federal governments issue permits that are like, you know, that are similar to leases. They might call them an easement or a right-of-way, but when the BLM lets you on their land and they you know, that's a permit, but it functions like a lease. Mm-hmm. And so excuse me?
I just said, mm-hmm, I'm listening, I'm agreeing.
Yeah, so I talk about these on the federal, state, and local level, and you know, about how they work and what, you know, all along here there are references. Like I've got like 37 pages of reference notes that, you know, where you can look up in the back and find links to like the federal government and what their public right-of-way system is, and for telecommunications and wireless. So this isn't just information. This is like also where to research more information about every one of these topics that I brought up. So I also talk about joint use agreements. Like that couldn't be a road or a right-of-way joint use. It could be like fiber, like underground burial joint use. And so we get into that. You know, you got to talk about franchise agreements when you're talking about rights-of-way, and when you're talking about the scenario of what small cells and what cable companies are involved with. Cable companies all, of course, have franchise agreements. And pole attachment, which has been around for a long time and now applies to wireless. And, you know, so those are other agreements and construction agreements. So I love construction agreements when I, you know, can get to somewhere where they got a tower but they're not using it. And we either want to replace it or we want to, you know, take it over or what have you. And it's an ideal place to say, okay, this is what the client carrier will do, and put its stuff up on that tower, and you know, often it's a replacement. But you know, then we bring in the construction manager in that stage so that he knows what's coming up down the road. We're coordinating here. And some of that has to do with, you know, I like to start those out with my own paralegal self, as you know, with the whereas clauses and so forth. And NDAs, you know, SNDAs, the subordination and non-disturbance and attornment agreements, they are as this chapter indicates, miscellaneous agreements that support the lease, and then other, you know, more, you know, minor non-disturbance waivers and consents. A lot of times we do these for, it could be, you know, a spouse who's not really in the ownership of a property, or it could have to do with mineral rights, and there's anywhere from 16 to 116 different owners of the mineral rights, and that's its own context about trying to see if we can get them to waive any interest they have. But companies I've worked for will take the extra step to at least try to give notice to mineral owners, subsurface owners, about what their intentions are and so forth. They may not be willing to pay anything for the waivers, but that doesn't take away from the fact they've made notice and so forth. And finally, amendments. Obviously, amendments are catch-all, but that's what we do. Amendments are a big part of site acquisition going forward in management. So then that sets us up for the final chapter on space rights. Just finalizing the space rights. It's 10 pages on its own. Going through the landowner review of the agreement that's ready to be signed. The negotiations, how it's different, how you do it different with corporations, and what if you have to have substitutions to the exhibits, to an exhibit because it's changed, best ways to handle that, having the memorandum of lease signed that can be recorded, just developing those. I mean, when I started, like I said, back in 1980, and I went out and I had agreements signed in a week, I talked to the office about what little minor changes and initials there might be. But today, and for a long time now, you don't draft a lease and give it to a landowner to sign. And anytime I do draft a lease and I give it to the landowner, it says this is just for information only. Do not sign this because it is not an agreement. The lawyers are the ones that draft the final, we call them executables.
Right.
And then the process of getting those signed by the property owner and the client, and then the recording, going through it talks about, I talk about going through a couple pages on just recording these agreements, and that's kind of where we wrap up on space rights before we go into Section 6 on permit rights. There's not as many chapters in Section 6, but one of them is longer than the others. So basically there's 4 chapters in Section 6. One is just making the permit applications. Another is submitting it to the planning staff and getting their review and getting them to issue hearing dates. That's one essential function that covers those 2, and then Chapter 30 and 31. Chapter 30 is community due diligence. So here is kind of where the rubber meets the road when it comes to getting a permit. Basically what I did is I went through every area that we typically get inquiries, controversies, debates, communication from the community to the community, from the community citizens to the community planners, and then to us as agents for the client to answer. I start out here, I think, aesthetics. I mean, obviously, how does this thing look? And then we talk about different types of structures, whether it's a tower, a pole, a stealth pole, a multi-story building, a flagpole without a flag, doing photo sims, light. How much light comes off of the site at night in a rural, in a suburban area where people moved away from the city so that they could see the stars at night. Talk about painted poles or towers, co-location accommodation. So all that on aesthetics is just going to be about how it looks to start out with. And then there's, communities are going to want their public service to be able to co-locate on some towers, and companies deal with that different. I just address everything. I address it from the perspective of what can be expected. And to go any further is to communicate with people in the project that would have, more information. But this just gives the more of a novice site acquisition a way to start that conversation. Talk about public agency co-location, like on public safety towers or them on yours. A lot of times people say, well, where's your FCC license? Anything they could do. Maybe take a pot shot. So, there's links in here about where to go to get the FCC license, how to do that. A lot of times in a zoning hearing, they'll say, well, you just want this. You don't really need it. So there's a couple of pages of language there about how to address that objection. And then how things have changed from the system capacity and speed. We used to talk about the speed of the system, and now we talk about the capacity throughput of it. And we look at these in the context of, well, once they issue a search ring, you're talking about a year and a half maybe before that site might get built. It could be longer. It might get shorter in some areas. I mean, there was a day we were building sites in 6 months, and I think now it's more like 14, 15 months or more. And that's not even where you get a hard time with zoning. You just got to go through, a normal conditional use process for zoning. And then I talk about engineering, getting engineering support from your company. What you can get, what you should try to, the more you can do on your own. But then when you really need it, you really need it, and you can't just kind of act like, oh, I got it covered. And you got to be able to tell the difference. Property values, I've got some reports that are from Appraisal Institute that I link to that talk specifically about the impacts of having a new site. Some of these done in New Zealand, some in Florida, but they're definitely high quality reports that have been reported in the Appraisal Institute magazine. Talk about safety. That's a general topic. That's going to cover RF under safety. Like, what are the types of safety issues? And I explain in my own way, what is frequency spectrum. I got, a graph of the frequency spectrum. I characterize what a wavelength is. Talk about what, RF safety rules. Talk about the inverse square rule, about as you move away, as you double your distance from a signal, about how it gets smaller by the inverse square of moving away from that space. It's like sound. And how to calculate the near field. And, a lot of this is like, okay, talk to your RF engineer about this, but here you got something to show that, you did a little homework on it first. About, carriers have to, it's one thing to say, okay, this site's not going to, it's not going to exceed any regulatory level, but, it's a whole other thing, get the carrier to write a compliance statement that says they will comply with that. That's, these are just things that close up, loose ends when you're in the hearing environment. So often, these questions come up and they never get answered. And so there becomes a lot of distrust for the people bringing in the applications when they can't answer questions. And those questions are just not that difficult to address. And so that's what this does. This is the longest chapter in this book, is like 30 pages. And and that's not the end of it, because because there's pages and pages that are in the reference notes to link to government websites. I mean, all the big government agencies have said, okay, RF signal has been evaluated and evaluated and evaluated, and there's no indication that in so many certain words that this is a problem. Now, when I did my master's thesis was 83, almost 40 years ago. They'd been studying this for 30 years already. And now, as I point out here in the book, it's easy to say and to point at these government websites and say, it's been another 30 years, and they're still not tying down stuff that is outside of regulatory compliance to something that anybody should be concerned about. I mean, that doesn't mean you go up on a rooftop and stand in front of, an operating antenna because you're in the near field. But these antennas going on, as long as that near field is away from somewhere someone's going to be sitting or standing on a regular basis, I mean, then you have safety compliance and so forth. Safety goes on into, well, what do you have? Security fence? You got a sign? How have you designed the site with precautions, like with the fencing and so forth, and with the fall alarm system? What are the structural design standards that went into this? All these things can be documented for each specific project. Sound, bring in the decibels, like a graph there of what typical noise levels are from different sources and so forth. And so it's a toolbox in this respect for answering issues that come up and researching them as well. And finally, I finish off that whole section on community due diligence with termination. We always get the question about, well, what if you don't need the site anymore? And
right.
Termination's part of the lease. And so I finished that up there, and then there's just really one more chapter. One more chapter and then a little bit more. So the last chapter, chapter 31, it's really just about how government bodies, are organized, how they conduct hearings, and getting final documentation. Like with leases, we had a section on final space rights and getting that all finalized, because you don't get paid unless you can pass the closeout. And so here, the same way, I talk about commissions and boards, types of commissions like the Planning Commission, and talk about city council and county and township boards. About neighborhood groups they're governing bodies as well, referral agencies anyway. The Zoning Board of Adjustment, I talk about the historic architectural review committees that exist, and then I talk about public hearings, and then I go into talking about preparing for public hearings and making presentations at public hearings, and I have two approaches that I use. One is based on my background in sales. I don't know if you might have heard of this before. When I first was trained in sales, they trained us on the American Management Association's principles of professional salesmanship. So I use a format that's easy to remember in your head about what to do, what to say next, or where you're going and how you're dealing with every presentation. And then I also go to the legal community for an approach they use in hearings, where you present a rule and an application, and you show how that rule applies to your situation, and then you kind of close with the rule again. And this is something that lawyers use when they're making courtroom presentations. You got to keep in mind the fact that you usually only have about 3 minutes to talk, and you might be given more, but most of these hearings are won before you get there, before you have to make your 3-minute talk. so that legal approach was the first you present the issue, and then the rule at hand, the application of the rule, and then a conclusion. I'm just giving some more tools for people to think about how to deal with going into a presentation. Talk about unanticipated developments. Devote some time to that, and conditional approvals, hearing completions, and then so what's the scenario about appealing? There's going to be an appeal period. This stuff is in the zoning code, and it could be a hearing, an appeal hearing. It could be somebody's appealing your approval, or it could be that you're going to appeal a denial, and that decision's going to come from the carrier if that happens. But you need to know these things. These things go. The appeal period and the rules around that, they go into the skip back there in the first half of the before the site selection was done and so forth. So that completes Chapter 31 out of Section 6. I just have one more section that's not too extensive. It has 3 items in it. The first one is about the perspective of project management. And I tie together a lot of the stages. I talk about project management, about the different stages of initiating, planning, executing, controlling, and closing out projects, and then which of the items that we've gone through that are part of the wireless site development process fit into which of those stages, and then about tools and techniques and tasks that we use to move the stage of the project from start to finish, and then into the next start and finish. So this is all very, it's only 10 pages, but it's a warm up for site acquisition people being project managers. And I recommend at the end of the book, and I've had some people take me up on that we're in site acquisition and went out and got their project management certificate. And so I just talk about the major milestones and what sections they come in and how, and I give information about the Project Management Institute and, where to kind of delve in more to the project management profession. And the only 2 things after that are very short. There's a conversation on closing out, getting the permit documentation and the permit details and determining the value of the work and the contractor requirements. Sometimes we do some of this and we pass it along, and sometimes the contractors just come in and do this. But we're looking for a very smooth handoff, and sometimes it just we can't take it any further than when a contractor comes in 3 or 4 months later, and sometimes the building inspector, building authority, they might want more from us than what we can do without having the contractor determined and in their door. But we do the best we can for a smooth handoff. That's close out, and the very last item that I talk about here for a couple pages is about how jurisdictions will often want to do a periodic review on conditional use permits. And they'll always contact the site act guy, even if he's like on another project. And not only that, but the property owner is going to make inquiries based on people wanting to come in and buy easements, under the leases and so forth. And so I have dialogue about that, about being professional with either passing that information on and or given some advice to the property owner on how to respond to that.
John, when we spoke on Monday, you had said something to me, and before you talk a little bit about how to get a copy of this book, you had spoke to me on Monday about how you were working maybe to put this into some type of training format. Could you carry on about that?
Yeah, sure. First of all, the information to buy the book is available on the website firmlyanchoredinmidair.com. The first title of the book. And about the training, so I'm off from doing this work in the field for 35 years. I said I was transitioning my career into online training. I spent a better part of the last 2 or 3 years, with some gaps, looking at how I would do that on a website. And I launched the website 3.5 years ago when the book was launched. I considered different things I've considered, and I actually not just considered, but researched pretty extensive about online training, what they call LMS, Learning Management Systems. And I had all my content on one, actually based out of Raleigh, I believe, called Digital Chalk. And that's where you put it on someone else's site, and then you got to kind of comply with all of their details, and of course you're paying them increasing amount based on how many learners you got. And I also took and looked at my sites are WordPress, and I looked at a plugin on WordPress called LearnDash, where I could do the same thing myself and maybe have a little bit more flexibility, and then I just pay them like an annual fee for the plugin. And I've even gone beyond that. I mean, I spent a lot of time looking and kind of formatting my information from the book into different files and formats that would work on the website and on Digital Chalk and on LearnDash, and I finally came back, at least for right now, to where I've just the book. It's online, and you can go back and forth in the book the same way you can with the hard copy, because the hard copy comes with the ones I've sold all come with 2-inch binder, and there's cross references in every chapter back and forth to information that you might have already covered or that's future. And so this is the same way with the book that's on my WordPress site, telecombirddogs.com, so that was like the most simple way for me to put it on, and I think I'll get more into doing it other ways, but I wanted to be able to launch this in the most simple form online, because people ask for it online, and if they don't want to read a book, they'd rather look at a screen. That's cool. At least online I can add tests and certifications and develop a membership, and so while I have that content on that site, telecombirddogs.com, we're just kind of working out the store aspect of it right now, to where you can go in and register and then have access to it, and probably in a week or so I'll have that done. But the content is pretty well set, and it'll always be something for me to go through and update. Chapter 1 is like, I go in to update this, and I don't actually get much past Chapter 1, because it's like the thing that has to do with industry structure. And it's there's always new deals being made and new state-of-the-art information, and so whenever I go and update that, I do a lot of work on that. But most of all of the rest of the book is it's the same stuff. Getting real estate entitlements doesn't really change, researching and doing leases and getting permits. I mean, now there's some more new, different kinds of permits with right of way that are addressed in the book too. But most of that it doesn't change too much. I mean, the number of states that have a small cell legislation has gone up since I published the book from 13 to like 28 or 29, and that, so it's more links to add and so forth. But otherwise, it's most of the rest of the book is it's like a textbook disguised as a manual, as some people have said. It's a textbook. Some people say it's just so easy to read. It could be like a college textbook, though.
Well, I was chatting with David Zufall from Dish earlier today, and he said he lost his copy. So if you run into him in the Denver area, be sure to have one in the trunk of your car and fling it at David if you get a chance. Anyway, it's in the industry, and we appreciate you writing this, and it's a very thorough publication, as you can tell, as you've spent the last 2 hours going over it, and it's just there's so much that is wrapped up into it. And you could say this part is important, that part's important. Which part do you find most important? Well, it's all important, and all of it is a showstopper, John. If you do not do all the pieces and parts correctly, probably like you've outlined in this book, the amount of time and the rewind and you getting egg on your face with the carrier or the client, regardless if it's long-term evolution or 5G or whatever it is you're trying to launch, or even doing it for a radio station or doing a drop-in swap or any of that type of stuff. If you do not follow all the and cross the T's and dot the I's, you were just asking for a delay real quick.
Yeah. Well, I had one infrastructure company buy a couple dozen of these at the beginning of the year. They weren't going to hand them out to site acquisition people, I think, as much as project managers to train their site act people.
Oh, good.
The thing is that I think in our industry we're all like, everybody wants to burden the load, but I think that the secrets that exist that we don't want to talk about too much is how much shrinkage there is and losses on construction projects, and how unpredictable and how many sites have to be restarted every year due to a failure to get a local permit. How much time is wasted and how much capital expenses and excessive legal fees are there, and rejected permit applications. These things we don't get. Nobody wants to show, their vulnerabilities. But these vulnerabilities come out in industry surveys and so forth. So we know that they exist. And we know that where we only might have built 350,000 towers in the last 40 years, that we got hundreds of thousands of small cells and towers to build in the next few years. And even the small cells, they require real estate entitlements. You might drop it down to a license and call it an installation instead of construction, but you still need your entitlements. And so that's what I'm hoping that this can kind of upgrade the level of professionalism in the site development business.
Well, John, I can't thank you enough for having you on. It's been a joy, and you've told us where to get the book. That's at birddogstelecom.com, telecombirddogs.com. And it is on Amazon. I saw it there. It is on Amazon.
Yeah, you can get the ebook on Amazon, but the hard copy, you've got to send me an email at telecom John J. Rowe at telecombirddogs.com, or call me at 303-220-9100, or else just go to the website for the book. It's firmlyanchoredinmidair.com, or the same website is at book.telecombirddogs.com.
Alrighty, right there, we got a picture up of John and firmly anchored in midair, the Handbook of Wireless Site Acquisition and Permitting. John, I can't thank you enough for having you on. I hope you enjoyed riding along and having a little fun and talking about your publication. You're passionate about it. I know you've done all your carriers great work and everything, and you're still, as you said, looking to build some sites this year. We all are. But is there anything else you'd like to add? And I would love for you to come back on the show anytime. You're welcome anytime. And we just kind of jump on whenever we get a good guest. I appreciate you reaching out to me because you picked up on it, John. I'm here for you. You said you don't have broadcast equipment or you don't have all the stuff it takes. All I need from you is a telephone number, your voice, your content, a picture, and some other things, and we can make it happen. And I'll do all that work, and I'll take all that burden upon myself and the cost, and let you just do what you do best. And but I can't thank you enough for joining us on the show. A Man Who Truly Delivers.
Well, Stark, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I want to thank you. I was very impressed a couple of months ago when I saw that you were doing this. I wasn't sure about always how to pick up the schedule or anything, but the other thing is that I've been to some of the regional wireless shows out in the West, and I haven't gotten over to the southeast, to the northeast yet, and I appreciate your coverage there in the east part of the country. I would just say, additionally, I'm available on LinkedIn for to be connected with.
Well, and I think you would come and participate at any of the Wireless Infrastructure Association, State Wireless, and speak about site acquisition, maybe sign a few copies, maybe give one away in a raffle or something like that at one of the golf tournaments, any way to possibly meet more people, get the word out to people that there is a correct way to doing it, and you have written a guide and taken that time.
I am available for that, and as well as I could come out and tailor a training program for a couple of days or a week, or for individuals or for groups.
Well, John, I can't thank you enough. And with that being said, I believe we're gonna cash out here on this Friday and let it go. And I will talk to you soon, John. I will. It'll take me a little bit, but I'll get this up as fast as possible and clean it up a little bit. That way, it's got a good start point, a good finish point, like I do with all of them. And then I'll get that uploaded and archived and let you share it for those that missed it or those that are doing something else on this busy Friday. You did a fantastic job, and I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Thank you, Stark.
All righty. See you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.